Hi, everyone. Thank you all for sticking around for the Q&A this evening. I just wanted to briefly introduce our guests before welcoming them on. Director-producer Sam Soko is a film director, producer, and editor based in Nairobi who seeks out stories that enable him to engage in socio-political spaces. His work on civic literacy projects in music, nonfiction, and fiction have allowed him to connect with artists around the world. He's the co-founder of LBx Africa, a Kenyan production company that service-produced the 2018 Oscar-nominated short film, Watu Wote. Soko's first feature documentary project, Softie, premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival, winning a special jury prize for editing. He's an outspoken defender of freedom of expression and has taken part in global conversations on how to make media matter when the world is on fire. Soko is currently co-directing a film following the world's boldest experiment in universal basic income taking place in Kenya. Producer Toni Kamau is the youngest female African documentary producer to be invited as a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences documentary branch class of 2020. As a producer, writer, and founder of We Are Not the Machine Limited, a Kenyan-based production company, she tells stories of outsiders, rebels, and changemakers. Her past credits include TV documentaries for Al Jazeera and MTV Europe. The Sundance Special Jury Prize winner Softie, produced by Toni and directed by Sam Soko, premiered at Sundance. Her second producing credit is for I Am Samuel, directed by Rory Peck winner Pete Marimi, and it recently had its world premiere at Hot Docs 2020. Toni is currently in production on her third feature that explores home and belonging, and in development on a mockumentary series that explores media making around the global South. So please welcome Sam Soko and Toni Kamau. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
It was sort of auspicious timing that we got to witness the circus of the presidential debate directly before this.
It's very, very, very good timing.
I have to say that wow, by the time we get to the moment where the people line up for bribes, it really did make me cry for democracy. That is such powerful material for you to have caught on film. And I was reading a little bit about how you got involved with Boniface to begin with. And so tell us a little bit about that journey, because there was a plan to make something that predates specifically Boniface's story, and I think that would be interesting to talk about.
Yes, thanks again for making this happen halfway across the world from where we are. And so in the beginning, when we started making this film, I think the idea was to inspire a lot more people to get into being active citizens. And that's because there's so much apathy that exists, particularly in engaging in civil spaces and in speaking up on things that we find dear to our hearts. And in our case, democracy is something that we've grappled with ever since independence. So in the beginning, it was like, how do we make short videos and share them online and have to engage a lot more people, and so that they can learn from them. Mm-hmm. And at the time, we looked at several activists within the space, and Boniface was probably, I'd say, the most flamboyant and the one who kind of just really stood out, particularly because his protests were highly symbolic. And when we engaged him, he was like, hey, cool, I'm actually doing a protest right now, let's go. And over time, we kind of learned that the life of activism is different and complicated and mirrors so much of society, not only with his life, but also the life of his family and particularly his wife. So eventually it ended up being something richer and deeper and a lot more introspective, even especially for me as a Kenyan, and especially with questioning how I think and what I'd want to do in regards to making change.
So how did that then transition to being a full-blown feature, sort of verite look at his political campaign?
So we started filming a ridiculous bunch of protests, which was interesting. And one, I think they've a couple of moments, but a very striking moment that's actually in the film is the moment when he announces that he's running for office. And it was one of those moments when you're like, because you've been present in his life for a couple of years. By that time, I think we'd been around for 3 years. And
Oh,
it was those things are like, how you're, because we learned about it the same time with his wife, so it's not like we had like this pre-planning knowledge. So it was those things were like, how, like, considering what his family had been through before that, and with the knowledge that how crazy it is entering politics, it kind of became this moment and this space to really engage with the side of the family and his side as an activist. And taking that also to the side, what he was proposing to do was extremely different. Like, it was something that we'd never experienced before in Kenyan politics, which is having someone come on board and be like, hey, these are my plans, but I want you to fund my campaign.
mhm.
So that was like, okay, how would this turn out? And I think it's one of the most beautiful things you dream of as a documentary filmmaker, because you're like, okay, this is something will definitely happen if we continue being here. But then it also was a difficult moment because you've been here for so long and I couldn't wait for this to end. So,
Okay.
so you're like, I will only do this until the end of the election and I'm done. And then, but it took like 3 more years after that. So
Wow.
yeah.
Tony, tell us what is that process like for you producing to suddenly realize that something that had started out being a handful of shorter projects has now become a 6 to 7 year commitment.
So thanks for that question, and thanks again for making this happen.
My pleasure.
So I think I'm just going to let that question go to Soko because I actually joined the project after most of principal photography had been done.
Okay.
I was aware about the project, but yeah, I joined towards the end of 2017 after a lot of filming. Yeah, had been done.
Look, like it's the thing at that time when you're doing all this and you're figuring all this out, you realize, because again at the beginning I was doing a lot of the work, just producing and filming and putting all this stuff together, but you realize that this is a much bigger story than what you wanted to do in the beginning, and you need an incredible team around you and around the film. And Toni is like standout, one of the best producers we have in East Africa. And I bugged her for like a year. And like, we have to do this, we have to do this, we have to do this. And I think she kept looking at the material, she kept seeing what's happening, and her coming on board totally lifted a weight, and we could totally concentrate on the creative and engaging. And I think at the same time, a couple of more people also were coming on board. I Still Film was also coming on board. They're based in Montreal, Canada, and we kind of just, something incredible started happening in and around the end of 2017, early 2018, and really helped push the film forward and bring you what you guys watched.
There's a lot to talk about in terms of the politics in the film, but I'd rather start by talking about the family dynamics, because Njeri's participation in this and her storyline is so compelling and so raw at times that I'm curious to know, first of all, how participatory was the family in the beginning? Because often you have a charismatic person that you're following, and then you've got their private life, and there isn't necessarily the same enthusiasm for having all of that documented. So tell us about that.
So in the beginning, we we started filming Boniface, and like you said, Boniface is super charismatic, and he's larger than life in so many ways. And at the same time, Njeri was highly protective of the family and was like, okay, this is where the camera stops, which was like at the gate of their house. So the only the only time we would film would be, say, when there's a protest about to happen or there's something being planned. And at those moments, she would allow us into the space. But again, on the day he announced to us that he was running, us guys had been together for so long that we'd built a kind of camaraderie. And I remember, like, just after we kind of stopped filming that whole bit, I was chatting with her, and she was like, how dare he do this? I was like, yeah. and and at that point I was like, is it okay if we do like an interview, like 15 minutes, just to speak of um everything that's happening, what's going on, and getting your thoughts. It ended up being a 4-hour conversation. So it just, and I think at that moment, and one thing they say is I had developed a relationship with each member of the family separately. So at that point, it was like, okay, we're here with you now, and we're going through these trenches together. Let's and that they've really like embraced me and what we were doing, and were really honest in their conversations. And I think at that time it became very difficult for Boniface to be like, okay, you can see this and you can't see this. So it kind of like, okay, I know you have that relationship, so I'm going to have my relationship with you. And that allows for you to watch a film that has an honesty from all the sides involved. And even like when they were watching the film for the first time, they were having separate feelings about the moments because they were seeing stuff for the first time, even themselves.
One moment in particular that I'm not sure exactly why this hit me as hard as it is. Maybe it's because I'm a husband, but his wife, was saying something to him over the phone, which was, "This is the first time that you've actually looked at me while we've had a conversation. This whole time that I'm abroad," and quite frankly, his reaction was to kind of laugh because he's thinking about it from the standpoint of, I'm in the middle of this election, but I'm thinking, oh, that's a horribly that's a very sad thing that she just said to him, and the level of a husband and wife, and their experience of it is in that moment completely different. And I just think that those moments of family nuance where you sort of don't feel like they're really on the same page are so powerful in this movie. How did you go about, and Toni, maybe you can talk about coming in and seeing footage, even finding moments like that if you were filming for 7 years, like where do those really interesting revelatory moments come from? Did you have people logging specific things as you went? Was someone just going through everything? I'm just curious. Finding a moment like that, it doesn't seem inherently obvious, but it's so important to the story that you're telling.
Toni, you can go first.
Yeah, I think the first time I saw the material, because Boniface is someone who's really well known. He's this, he's celebrated as this individual hero, this person who is kind of mythical in terms of like a larger than life creature. So, I mean, he was quite well known and I have met him before. So the first time I saw the material, to be honest, a lot of it was focusing on Boniface and his journey, like the first rushes that I saw. And then honestly, like what changed for me and what made me really curious about the project was actually seeing more of Njeri and the kids. kids, because because now it started to look like a collective journey. And Soko had gotten something that no one else had been able to get, because a number of people had actually tried to do this documentary. There was a short that was done for New York Times. Someone had tried to cover him for Al Jazeera. A couple of people were trying to make features, but no one was ever really able to just go past, like you said, the public persona, where he's this activist who is a hero and we must, adore him. Like, no one had ever really gone past that barrier. So when I saw Njeri's material, and also especially, I remember the election when he announced that he was running for the election, I think my first thought was, are you for real? I would have killed this guy. So I think I wanted to just know more about like what her journey was, and also seeing like the material of the kids. I mean, it was that was kind of like what changed things. And I think the beauty of this project in particular, and why you see all those moments, was honestly because Soko also, I mean, the team was filming a lot, all the time. Like, they were kind of like, whatever was happening, they just went and filmed it, which is, I think, what's important for Verite. Like, everything can become a moment later on, and you shouldn't film things thinking that they're going to be part of the film, but film them because it's a moment in a character's life. And I think they had over 500 hours of footage. So where they were allowed into very intimate spaces. So there was a lot of stuff that was left on the cutting floor. Like, a lot was left. We had very many fights as the entire team about what would stay and what wouldn't stay in the film. Yeah. So I think that was what was magical
about one of those.
Finding gems.
What did you each fight for?
I don't wanna put Toni on the spot.
Toni can decide whether or not.
You know how, because we I edit as well, and we co-edited the film, so yeah. it was interesting. Like, very many things. Like, we had a ridiculous amount of footage that was hard to let go, and like what the thing that I think was highly striking for me in terms of getting the personal moments was how much trust I think they gave to me and the team. Mm-hmm. Because at the many moments which we were filming, that they were not talking to a filmmaker, they were talking to someone they know. And the many moments which you're filming and they totally ignore you exist, because they know, like, you're like part of the furniture, basically, even more. Because and especially with moments that have the kids, and moments that are between Njeri and Boni. And those two, it was more, because a lot of the time, if I was with Njeri, say for instance, or with like the moment you're talking about, immediately we stopped filming, and actually no, it's still like I was still filming. So after he said goodnight, she said goodnight, and he turns to me and he's like, "For real, another kid?" and it was.
Did they have that child, by the way?
No.
Oh.
But it's one of those moments that they feel that like you are there with them in the journey, and that allows you to engage in a more personal sense and give the audience that kind of honesty, which I think is very, very important.
Yeah, I think I can also just talk a little bit about a scene that I fought for that didn't end up, but in the film, but we compromised on a scene that was actually quite beautiful and pivotal. So one scene I remember we fought for was, because I'd never seen Boniface cry. So there was a scene where he was crying, talking about his mother in this long interview. And I was like, oh my God, he made him cry. It has to be there. But it didn't make sense because it was going to take the film on another trajectory. So that didn't end up staying in the film. But then in the course of trying to get like more vulnerability from Boniface, because that was very important to all of us as a team, to get more vulnerability and just more emotional access to him. We ended up like all agreeing on the scene where Boniface is talking, about like how he got the name Softie and growing up in poverty, when he takes the kids back to his house. And it was really amazing, because it was a testament to the fact that sometimes you end up where you need to end up at when you're going through the process of putting the film together, because we thought that some of us felt that one scene was really important because it showed emotional vulnerability, but actually there was a more important scene that we ended up discovering because of what we were looking for. So it was kind of like, you can kill your darlings, or you can find your actual gems, when you're fighting for your darlings, and asking yourself, like, why is this important? What does the scene say? And is there another way to say it that still contributes to the overall narrative? I think that was basically what our fights were over.
Yeah, no, very, very true.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask about a few moments in the film where you become aware of the cameraman, or the camera people that are there, because the first one I think is Njeri talking directly to the camera, responding to kind of a rhetorical question, but it's I think it was in the was it in the context of the death threats? How would you feel? And then turning it on the person asking the question. And then later in the film, particularly in that final protest that we see, where Boniface gets hit with the riot, was that like tear gas or something directly into his chest. You actually see filmmakers running around, some may be yours, some might not be. And actually, now that I think about it, there's a couple of shots where a shot is ended by either a camera falling or someone pushing it away or something like that. So it's sort of two pieces to this. The first one is, how was the relationship? How did that relationship develop over time as things did get harder, particularly for the family to, there's so much raw emotion happening in real time. Were there times where after this sort of added access, it did feel like, maybe this isn't, it's sort of the documentarian's dilemma. Keep filming through the hard times. So I'm curious about that from an emotional standpoint with the main characters, and then from a physical production standpoint when you're actually facing tear gas and riot police.
It's like you're saying, there were many times, like, because we were there for quite a bit of time, and there were many times that I'll answer this first from Boniface and Njeri's and the family's perspective, because there's I actually asked them that question when the film came out. I'd be like, now it's done, you can tell me, was there a time you'd be like, get rid of this guy? And it was like, there's many moments with which, particularly in and around the death threat, and in and around the kids' vulnerability, particularly with the absence of the father, and vice versa, in and around engaging with an electorate and people whom you feel dejected because you're like, I'm genuinely, I want to serve you, but yet you're asking me for money. And in all those spaces, for instance, with Boniface, he would chase us. He'd be like, I don't want to talk to you right now. I don't want to see you right now. He'd be like, switch off that thing. And he actually joked about it recently. He's like, he thinks I'm very pissed with him because there are many moments I missed because of that. And now retrospectively, he's like, he should have kept filming. It was fine. But the reality is, it's hard. It's very hard. And in my case, I think also, especially with the kids, and seeing them away from their father and seeing the relationship between the father and mother was hard. was, you're like, why I don't want to be a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. And interesting enough, the person who made me like really lifted my spirits when we were filming is Njeri. Because she's in one moment after I filmed because there's a day Nate was just out of it, like he really like he kind of really was separating himself, and I started filming him for most of the day, and then that's the day of the report card of the Father's Day letter. And when I was talking, then I was done, and then I just left, and I was like, I think I'm just gonna go back to Nairobi because this is too hard. And Njeri was, your presence makes us feel like our story counts. And I found that very powerful. And just that your presence allows us to feel like someone sees us and sees our story. And that, I was like, I have to do this. Like now there's no turning back because I've put myself out there and we've done this. So we have to we have to let people into their life and understand them and see them. And yeah, so
there are occasionally times where having a camera crew around you is a form of protection. Didn't seem like it in this case, to be quite.
It did many times. It did, especially during this one time we were in one of the informal settlements in Nairobi, and it was in the middle of the night and we were blocked off basically. It was super scary. And then because there was a crew there, a lot of the people thought we were like news media. So they let us pass and go. And we never went back again. But it was super, super, like we had this one time, this guy drew a gun on us and he just saw our equipment and he was like, okay, this might not be a good day. And that sort of like it did many times, but there are times we were also arrested, our stuff was broken because of the converse of that. So it played the dual role.
There's for me, never having dabbled in politics, you expect that the principal candidates, let's say in this case the presidential candidates, there's always that sort of risk that someone might get assassinated. But somehow I find it way more chilling that it was the election, the polling, the person that was guaranteeing the polling results was just murdered, without any particular indication of how or who, or clearly the why is sort of, you can imagine. When something like that happens, obviously all the politicians have to make a decision for themselves to keep going. But was there a time where you were like, this is getting out of control? Like,
And it's very interesting that you're asking that question off the bat of watching the debate. And we've experienced, and Toni of course will speak to this, but we've experienced engagements in elections for so long where the conversation throughout the election is trusting the process. And having being like, we don't trust the process, we don't, like that being the conversation. That has been our history for as far as I can remember. And what happens with that electoral official, what happened with that whole process of the election, is a good chunk of it, what is to blame for that is because of the lack of trust of the process. And the danger of that, you watched it. You've seen the consequence. And even I think in the film, I asked Njeri about what does she feel about the election. And what she says is essentially what most Kenyans feel, is that we want to trust the process. We're like, but why would something like that happen? And it's those red lights that that we always engage in, that we always see and take place, that of course, like I was scared throughout that process. And I don't think any Kenyan was okay, because it's coming, and it's coming for months. Like it's not like you wake up one day and you're like, it's only gonna happen tomorrow. No, it's coming. And then when it happens, you are all of a sudden shocked. But we were aware of that, and we are happy to a point that the Supreme Court of Kenya really came through. Even though it ended up in some other mess, but yeah, having strong institutions and structures really, really help. Toni?
Yeah, that's an interesting question when you ask that, because to be honest, and it sounds like we're minimizing the situation because someone lost their life, but at the beginning of the film, there was a 2007-2008 election where there was post-election violence when the president, the incumbent, basically just swore themselves in the middle of the night, and the election results just changed magically on TV, and then there was post-election violence in different swaths of the country. So we as a country had witnessed neighbors turning against each other, people had weapons. So I think because we had experienced something so extreme a couple of elections ago, like one officer losing his life, you were like, okay, it's not as bad as it was before. Because I think also, which is why, when it comes to protecting our democracies, you need to just cut things off at the beginning, because it's so easy to just get jaded, or it's just so easy to keep on minimizing things, because that's how democracies are attacked, one step at a time. It doesn't just happen just like that. So we were kind of like, okay, someone died, but it's not the whole country burning down in flames, which is a crazy thing to say, but that's where we were emotionally as a country, to be honest. Okay, at least from my perspective.
It's true.
So I want to take some questions from the audience. I do have one more thing I want to ask, but for anyone out there that has a question, if you place it in the Q&A box, I'm going to invite you over as a panelist temporarily. So if you'd like to turn on your video, we would love that. See your face. If you're not comfortable with that, just use your microphone. I know this is a very sort of, I guess, a silly thing to ask in the context of many more serious things in this film. But I'm kind of curious, how is Jaguar doing? He's been elected to office.
Hey, Jaguar. So Jaguar is doing, I don't know how he's doing personally, but as a representative of the people, he's doing horribly. Like he's so bad. He was arrested for making xenophobic comments. He basically asked the people of his constituency to kick out people from one of our neighboring countries and another country, and he still has his court cases going around. So Jaguar actually is in court for manslaughter, and yeah, Jaguar is it's a mess.
And he's not released another music video.
Yeah, he's not released another, at least. Yeah, no, he did. He has done a couple of songs while in office. So I don't know.
How does, I mean, he obviously has a credit for in the music here. So what is that? What was that?
That was fun.
What was that process like of clearing that? Clearing the licensing.
It was the most shocking thing, because due processes, you send them like an outline of what the film is about, you tell them what you're trying to do, and you ask them, we need to use the video. So it was, when we got the email like, yes, we'll give you permission to use the video, I was like, okay.
But remember, we were vague because we had to strike a balance between, because this was the thing that we all talked about the most as a team, because first of all, we were like, can we fair use this? Obviously not. And then when we were just giving the summary, we were kind of a little bit vague but specific. So it was a balancing act of writing the synopsis, the short synopsis.
But we also did it very early on, like before the film was like, we knew we needed to use one of his songs. So it was we did it like before we knew how we were going to use him in the film, and I think that kind of allowed us a little leeway in how expressing. But we were pretty honest in terms of how how like what we were trying to do, and I think that I don't know. I'm curious.
But we also didn't go into too much detail. Yes, because I think that's the thing. Like also when you're clearing stuff, of course you have to be very honest about the use that it's a documentary about this other person, etc. But yeah, but I think it's just like give as much detail. I mean, that was always the lawyer's advice. Give as much detail.
He's gonna watch it.
Honest, but don't give too much detail. So
but he's gonna watch it soon, so I'll come back with feedback.
Okay, so I have some questions that I've been asked to read, and then I also have some questions from people that I'm going to bring over. So just to give you fair warning, I'm going to call Ismael Villegas and then Jules Minton. But just to kick this off, let me start with one of these questions I've been asked to read. Can you discuss how Boniface was influenced and inspired by President Obama and what Obama means to the people of Kenya?
Boniface is influenced in Obama in many ways. So in 2008, I think 2008, he actually covered part of his run in the US as a photojournalist. Like he actually came to the US and covered like a lot of, especially in and around during the election and after the win. And he was really taken by the idea of a young politician trying to do or engage with the public in a different way. And like the Obamas have been a very big influence, both for him and for Njeri. Like Njeri is a huge Michelle fan, so huge influence.
Okay, Ismael, I'm going to bring you over as a panelist. And let's see if Ismael can turn on video as well.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes. Go ahead.
Oh, great. So first off, thank you so much for being here. And just a quick question for you. Were there any other candidates alongside Boniface that the team considered following for the documentary? And how did you find Boniface and his family to be the subject of the documentary? Thank you again.
Thanks, Ismail. In the beginning, we were looking at other activists, but none of them kind of stood out more than Boniface, particularly because he was young, and his style of activism was very, very different. A lot of the activists that were there before were, I think, more in very many different spaces. One of the people would say we were looking about, but retroactively, was Nobel Prize winner Wangari Maathai, the late Wangari Maathai, and just celebrating her activism. But it kind of felt more important to engage with someone who was dealing with the urgency of what was taking place at the time. And that's why we ended up going with Boniface. And with the family, it took a while, but they eventually welcomed us to their home and allowed us to film them.
While I'm moving Jules over, Jules, your question is also going to sort of dovetail with one that was asked by Hermione, who doesn't want to be on camera. So I'll just I'll start by saying that Hermione was asking about Boniface's arrest in 2019 for plotting a revolution. So Jules, I'm going to move you over, and then we can talk about that in conjunction with your question. All right, we see you. Hey.
Honored to share. Hi. Hi, Alex. Honored to share the screen with Toni and Sam. I've seen many political documentaries, and yours really stands out because of the wonderful balance between the political story and the personal story.
Wow.
And as you mentioned, Sam, to me, the highlight of the film, or the emotional highlight of the film, was seeing the son write a Father's Day card to his mother, which, you know, was so touching and heartbreaking. Yeah, I also, as the other questioner, wanted to find out what has been happening with the entire family, with Softie and the entire family since then, since you stopped filming.
Thanks so much for watching the film and for your very beautiful words, Joe. The family is doing great. Overall, they're we're laughing with them how COVID, this is the most time they've spent together in a very long time. And the thing that's crazy is, like, with Boniface, his life still, you know, he always walks around with a lot of drama because of his work. And like the other person who asked the question, so Boniface was arrested in 2019. Like, they came to his house and picked him up and the allegation was for plotting a revolution. And then when we got to the police station, he was held there for a couple of hours. But then when we were asking the police, and then the police were like, no, we just asked him to come for a cup of coffee and just, you know, to discuss a few things that are taking place in the country. And it's totally ridiculous. But yes, so far I think he's taking a break from many things, trying out farming for a few months. So thinking about whether he'd want to run again. And yeah, Njeri is also, you know, they co-founded this creative hub called Power 254, and she's been like putting a lot of work in the creative hub, just trying to see how they can work with more young people in using art for social change. So, and the kids are doing great, like really, really great.
Is he committed to involving his wife in the decision to run this time around?
Yeah. He was asked the same question when we premiered at Sundance, and he was like, I will not do that again.
Better not.
Which is great.
Thank you very much. And as I say, I think you've made a great film.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jules. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me bring over Bruce.
Do this all day long at SC. I should know how to do here.
Hey, how are you?
Alex, thank you so much for keeping the series going and bringing such great films and interesting things. I had a couple questions. Just my wife and I wanted to know how Boniface got from sort of his poor upbringing. Clearly, they have some kind of middle-class status. They have a couple of cars. And then in the beginning also, there's references to sort of intertribal tensions, like people wanted to know by his last name. And I was sort of curious what that was, and did that play a continuing role? Because it's not picked up again after.
And thanks so much for watching, you and your wife. It really means a lot to us. I'll take the first question. Toni can take the second. And so Boniface went to like sort of like a journalism college, and started off as a photojournalist. And something that's interesting with filming over all these years, it makes people forget of how good a photojournalist he was before he became an activist, because he was twice selected the CNN's photojournalist of the year in Africa. But he quit all that to become an activist. And in the particularly in the beginning of the film, we used a lot of his photographs because, like I said, people forget how good a photojournalist he was. So that's the path, I think, that really helped them get into to have a life that they have now. And he does right now. He does double in photography to make and to pay some checks at the end of the month. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks for the comments and for the questions. So I think when it comes to like tribe in Kenya, something that we see across the world, anyone in a position of power will find a way to divide and rule. You know, in some countries, it's based on political parties where you polarize people along those lines. In Kenya, it's along tribal lines. And this is something that stems from, you know, the colonial era. So when it comes to Kenya, we have 43 tribes. We have over 43 tribes. The tribes that are considered the wealthiest in Kenya is called the Kikuyu tribe. 3 out of 4 presidents out of a country that has over 40 tribes, 3 out of 4 have come from one tribe, which is the Kikuyu tribe. And that's because when we got independence, a lot of people who came from that ethnic community had already received like a lot of education because there are a lot of missionary schools in those areas. So a lot of them were in a position to inherit, you know, a lot of like important positions in companies, in politics, because they'd had access to education just because of how colonialism happened in our country and where the settlers settled. And then another tribe that's considered powerful, and this is interesting because it's just based on all of these narratives that are created, you know, by the colonialists, by media, because media also perpetuates these narratives. Like for example, before the 2013 election, there was this political pundit called Mutahi, and he kept on talking about tyranny of numbers, and he kept on saying the Kikuyu tribe is the largest tribe, and if you don't have the Kikuyu tribe on your side, then you can't be able to win a political seat. And that became this kind of like self-perpetuating narrative that wasn't really true to a certain degree because it's 1 out of 43 tribes. And then so tribal tensions are a huge thing in our country, and it's used quite a bit to, you know, polarize people against each other. And we're starting to see that play out again because we're having our next elections in 2022, where the Kikuyu president is basically like anointing someone else from another tribe to lead, and is trying to galvanize people along ethnic lines. So it's something that's very important. We didn't focus on it because it's something that's talked about quite a bit in the media. And what was important for us was Boniface's journey as an activist and the family dynamics. So we made a conscious choice not to go too much into that because it was already something that was already happening, you know, writ large in the country, and we didn't think that we should focus on it. Yeah.
What tribe is he from, by the way?
Kikuyu.
He's Kikuyu, which actually adds more drama to to everything because he's considered a traitor.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Bruce, moving you back over. It was good to see you. Okay, I'm going to call on Nkechi, but before I do that, and that'll be our last live question, Karen wanted me to just read this instead of coming into the video portion. So after being so deeply entrenched for so many years in this project, how do you identify and transition to the next project?
That's thank you so much, Karen. It's something I think I'm still going through right now in terms of engaging and figuring out stuff I'm interested in, but I still want to work within the same spaces of interrogating how our lives are influenced by different aspects. With Softie, it was clearly within like activism and how we view activism and what activism means to us. And in the next project I'm working on is kind of the same thing in terms of essentially opening up capitalism and what that looks like and feels like in a place like Kenya vis-a-vis how it looks like in the US. And I'm happy I'm co-directing with someone, which is also a new experience. So it's a slow process, but it's something I'm embracing. So.
And Toni, how about you? You've got so many projects in the works.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like it's definitely a different experience for a director, because like as a director, you're kind of consumed by your film, because unfortunately there's kind of no other way to do it. Either you're completely, because that's how you get great art. So at the time I was working on multiple projects and still am, where it's a fundraising role and a creative role. So it's a very special project. So it's been difficult kind of walking away from it. But I think at some point you just have to emotionally tell yourself, okay, the film is now out in the world. We have a distributor. It's time to just step back a little bit and let other people, take on this other part of the journey. So that's always emotionally difficult to do, because it kind of feels like you're giving up your baby to someone else.
That's actually a really good transition to our last question. So, Nkechi, feel free to jump in.
Sure, thank you. Thank you very much for making that documentary. It was really moving to watch it, for me particularly, because I feel like a lot of the story translates beyond Kenya. So I'm from Nigeria, and it struck me that Boniface's story could just easily have happened in Nigeria. Probably did happen in Nigeria to a certain level, with a different activist, of course. So I wondered what your plans are in terms of not just distribution, but like getting it across audiences beyond Kenya, East Africa, and probably the US. So like, do you have any plans of distributing it across Africa specifically?
Toni?
Yes. So, I mean, it's totally true what you're saying. And thanks for asking that question. I mean, yeah, because we're all, I think the whole world, and I think our African states in particular, are just struggling with democracy and just struggling with this question of what comes first, family or country. So we would love to have this film across Africa. It's very difficult. Unfortunately, we don't have too many distribution channels within the continent. So we are in conversations. We do have a world sales agent. Outlook is our world sales agent. And we're working with them in other parts of the world. But Africa is just difficult. So we're trying to speak to a Pan-African distributor to at least get it on some form of terrestrial broadcast. When it comes to impact, oh my God, we'd love right now when it comes to impact distribution and having conversations around democracy, that's happening right now in Kenya. We would love to figure out a way to replicate what we're doing in Kenya in other parts of the country. It's a question of resources and time. But yeah, we think it's important. And if you know any way we can get it out there, or any potential impact partners in Nigeria, would be happy to get those contacts.
Yeah, and some of the things we're thinking about and working on creatively is like cut downs of the film, just to like a bit shorter versions of the film to engage with in many community screenings.
Like a high school.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The ridiculous thing though is we got an adult rating in Kenya.
You did for this?
Yeah, 18.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was like, okay. So we
too much corruption exposed.
So we're also trying to figure out creatively how to maneuver that space so that we can have high school and kids in primary school to watch the film and have a lot more community engagement. Yes, so it's something we are really fighting to share, because like you said, there's so many synergies, like there's so many parallels on so many levels. And I keep telling a lot of my American friends that, you know, what you guys are experiencing now, we've been there, we've seen it, so talk to us. As in, otherwise,
Yep.
you know. So, thank you so much for your question.
Thank you for answering, and thank you for the documentary. It was really powerful.
Thank you, thank you.
Speaking of parallels with the American election, and this is a real, like, a throwback to last year, but tell us about the Kenyan UBI initiative, because all of a sudden we're all really interested in this, and I was sort of surprised to read that in the bio.
So 3 years ago, there's an organization based in the US that's conducting like the largest universal basic income experiment in Kenya. And it's crazy and ridiculous, but the experiment is taking place for 12 years.
Wow.
So there's families in places in Kenya that are going to get, like, it's in different versions. So there are people who get lump sum of the money, there are people who get a monthly amount. So that's going to happen for several years, but I'm not going to film for 12 years. So we're basically filming up to a point next year and interrogating the effects, both physical, just how it affects people physically, but also like psychologically and mentally on a local scale, and reflecting that outwards, particularly because, like you said, UBI is really madly blown up because of Andrew Yang and and all that kind of conversation. So filming that in a Kenyan context, but then we have privilege to film the same in the US on a larger level. So kind of seeing how these two come together.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you both so much. This was such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
And
this is great.
Thank you for joining us. You're something like 10 hours ahead of us, so you've got a good day.
Thank you. And thanks for staying up. Thank you everyone for staying up. I know it's quite late on your end.
Yeah.
So really appreciate you watching it. And
much love, guys. Thank you so much.
Absolutely worth it. Thank you so much. And good luck. Hopefully we'll see you over here sometime in the future when the, pandemic decides to allow filmmakers to come back to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
We'd love to get you to campus.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thanks, and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.